Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Developing a Proper Worldview. This will be episode number 51. And so just as a warning, if you haven't watched the previous episodes, please go back and watch those. These are done in order, and I believe it's necessary to watch them in that order, as we're trying to, like the series is called, develop. And develop is done, in a step-by-step process. So we definitely want you to go back and watch all those other videos first. I don't know why we said we. Who's we? It's just me. But yeah, so we're continuing on in part 3. The gospel being part 1. The debunking evolution part 2, and then part 3, the occult foundation of the American empire. And we've been looking at the America's Secret Beginnings series. We're still on disc 1, and basically it's showing how we had occultists involved in the very foundation of America. Men like Thomas Jefferson, who was a deist, Benjamin Franklin, who was a member of the Hellfire Club, Thomas Paine, plus a multitude of Freemasons. Whether or not they were aware of the conspiracy or not, there's some iffiness on that. George Washington seems to have been a pretty decent guy, perhaps even a Christian, but he was involved in Masonry, so it's like where's the line there? But we're tracing it back to how the occult has always believed in a new world order concept, but back in the day it was called the New Atlantis. They believed in creating a world government ruled by philosophers, based in the Gnostic mystery religions. So it would be a Luciferian system. Whether or not they acknowledge Lucifer as being the head of the Gnostic mystery religions, that's what he is. They just refer to him by a multitude of different names. Some of them don't even give it a name. They just buy into the precepts and the concepts that we can create a world empire of unity, basically based in a philosophy of do what thou wilt. Do whatever makes you feel good. We don't have to obey the morals and laws and precepts of God. Those no longer have to bind our conscience. If we'll all just agree to live in a lawful, they do preach law. They want, you can't injure or take from another person, but other than that, you do whatever you want. You want to and a lot of that ties back to sexual perversion. So a lot of those mystery religions were built around fertility gods and goddesses, because ultimately that's the main heart of the flesh. Is man wants to have sex with whomever he wants, whenever he wants, without feeling bad about it. And so a lot of that is based in this, along with they don't want to worship the one true God. They want to worship self or whatever. They want to acknowledge that they are the highest being. They want to become gods. And so all these Gnostic philosophies are built in that. And back in the day, it started, maybe not started, but was really solidified and emphasized as the New Atlantis theory. And so we're seeing how Francis Scott Bacon was really a big promoter of that idea that the discovery of America was going to be the New Atlantis. America would be the foundation of this new worldwide utopia. And we're seeing how Francis Scott Bacon's ideas probably stemmed not from John Dee, a wizard. I think Merlin, the fictional character, was based on John Dee. But his ideas are coming from demons through occultic activity forbidden by the Bible. They're communicating with what the Bible calls principalities and powers, dark forces of Satan, who are the rulers of this world. Satan is the ruler of this world and gives his power to whomever he will. So he gives secrets to men through these occult activities, and then they develop agendas and ideas and philosophies and new age religions through these things they're being told by demons. So John Dee was involved in that. Francis Scott Bacon was involved in that. Probably influenced Benjamin Franklin through that. Benjamin Franklin brought it over here along with other occultists that had come over here, like I mentioned, like Thomas Paine and so on and so forth. But so you really have a lineage stemming from these old world people who believed in this new Atlantis, this new Atlantean idea, this utopia idea of a new world order coming through and undergirding the foundation of America, hidden behind a veil of Christianity, because these men were wise enough to know we need, most of this country at that time were Christians or Christians in name and believed in the Judeo-Christian moral ethic. So we had to have that morality there, but behind it, it's an occult system growing up with the goal of eventually creating the new Atlantis, the new world order. And so this documentary is laying the foundation of that. And then as we go forward, we're going to see how that's played out throughout American history, to the point now where you have politicians openly calling for a new world order, calling for a world government. And then you start to see the agenda behind things, like COVID, like global warming. It's a conspiracy. These men create a worldwide panic and then offer world government as the solution. Like, remember when Al Gore was promoting global warming so heavily, what was his solution? We need a global carbon tax to limit carbon and to limit the carbon footprint. And in order to enforce a global tax, you need a global government. So that was the agenda behind that, and it's really the driving force behind a lot of things. But we'll get into all that as we go down the road. So we left off at the 1 hour and 50 minute mark. We got about an hour to go on this one. I'm going to try to get through it all here today. So without further ado, let's jump into it and take a look. And just as a caution, I sometimes feel guilty drinking soda. I got this huge Sprite here. Because we're going to look at some of the chemicals that are like in water and air, and this stuff is garbage. High fructose corn syrup probably. Yeah. And even if you get the diet stuff, it has chemicals in it that are really bad for you. So I try to avoid this stuff as much as possible. I'm not saying it's sinful. I just don't want to tell you, hey, avoid the fluoride in the water, and then I pick up this poison. I don't know. I felt like having a Sprite today, but so don't jump on my case too much. But anyways, let's jump into this and pick up where we left off. Okay, here we go. 1 hour and 50 minutes and 11 seconds.
Dee was the first to apply Euclidean geometry to navigation. He built the instruments for and trained the first-rate navigators. He is credited with coining the word Britannia, or Britain, and his influence laid the foundation for what would become the British Empire. He made his own maps and is said to have charted the northeast and northwest passages in his attempts to increase the wealth of England by gaining access to the New World. And believe it or not, the New World has been secretly influenced by his example. John Dee is considered the original wizard. He was the inspiration for the character of Prospero in Shakespeare's The Tempest, and for Christopher Marlowe's Dr. Faustus. In the modern world, Dee was the role model for J.K. Rowling's Albus Dumbledore in the Harry Potter books, the character of Gandalf in Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, and even Ian Fleming's James Bond. Few people know that John Dee was the original Agent 007 in Her Majesty's Secret Service.
Ian Fleming got the idea for his designation 007 for James Bond from the fact that that was how John Dee would sign his correspondence when he was overseas working as a spy for Queen Elizabeth. He would always sign his name 007. And that's where the concept came in for James Bond. Because James Bond was originally intended to be kind of a modern day Dr. John Dee, although it never really developed that way.
While Dee's character continues to intrigue, some would argue that compelling the imaginations of literary minds was not his greatest influence. This image shows what appears to be a wizened old man passing a lamp in the dead of night to a younger man in Elizabethan clothing. Baconians believe this old world engraving represents Dr. John Dee passing the lamp of esoteric knowledge and wisdom to his successor, Francis Bacon. Both Bacon and Dee were men of science, dedicated to the advancement of learning. Both men were members of the Rosicrucian Society, of which Bacon would become the chief. Like Bacon, John Dee believed that America was indeed the lost continent of Atlantis. But where did he get this idea? Was it given to him by his angels? And did he pass this concept on to Francis Bacon? We can only speculate. But when Queen Elizabeth took the throne, the dream of colonizing this new Atlantis would come closer to being a reality.
When Bloody Mary, as she was called, this was Mary Tudor, who had been now on the throne and persecuting the Christians, and she died, perhaps ironically, with a false pregnancy. And so when she died in 1558, then after that, Elizabeth I came in as queen. And so there were questions of what day should be chosen for Elizabeth's coronation.
The coronation of a new ruler was an important event, the timing of which, it was believed, could determine the success or failure of a monarch's reign. To ensure her good fortune, Elizabeth called upon her old friend, Dr. John Dee.
He was the Queen's astrologer too. He computed the date for her to be crowned.
Astrology in those days didn't mean necessarily what we understand it to mean today. There were some odd things about it, but there was a study of the stars, that we would call today astronomy. So they had to know about the movements of the stars and the planets, and they were pretty knowledgeable about that. So it was a strange mixture of astrology and astronomy. So that's what he was doing.
It's debatable how the efforts of Dee's astrology impacted the course of England. But when the new queen took the throne, it marked the beginning of an unprecedented era in English history. During this time, the language of the New World would be transformed, ancient knowledge would unfold, and the course of the philosophic empire would be established. The modern world would be changed forever, largely because of Queen Elizabeth I.
And she was bright. This was Queen Elizabeth of England, one of the brightest queens that England has ever had. Whether she was a true Christian or not was perhaps doubtful, but at least she did support the Protestant cause and not the Catholic one.
The Queen's Protestant faith made her immediate enemies in Rome. In April of 1570, Pope Pius V issued a papal bull excommunicating her from, quote, the unity of the body of Christ.
Well, that meant that the Pope was saying to all the Catholic kings of Europe, go and invade England, kill the Queen, take over the country, make it Catholic, and I'll give you my blessing. So that was a huge threat to England and the Queen. So the English, who didn't like that, didn't like that idea, they formed a close-knit protection around the Queen and their country.
To answer the threat of spies and assassins from Rome, the English set up an intelligence network under the leadership of Sir Francis Walsingham, known as the Queen's Spy Master. Among his secret agents were Dr. John Dee and later on Sir Francis Bacon, along with their Rosicrucian Society, which is said to have been formed in England for the purpose of protecting Elizabeth. But some suspect the Order of the Rose and Cross had yet another agenda.
I think they would have definitely been on the Protestant side of things. They would have had a vested interest in using all of their both political savvy and occult savvy to protect the queen, but I also think they had an esoteric agenda as well.
This society had a very esoteric base. Behind it had links with the wisdom societies, the wisdom traditions throughout Europe, and inherited a lot of that wisdom light being passed on. And so they had an inner program which was to try to raise consciousness of society.
According to Bacon, Rosicrucianism seemed to represent the very heart and focus of the entire New Atlantis concept.
Francis Bacon's last book that he was writing at the time when he allegedly died, that was 1626, but his last book was called The New Atlantis, and the subtitle was The Land of the Rosicrucians.
Why the land of the Rosicrucians, or Rosicrucians? Why did Bacon deem their influence to be so important?
Rosicrucianism gets its name from the symbols, the main symbols used, and that's the rose and the cross. But these are very ancient symbols. They go back long way in time, and being used by different societies for thousands of years.
In the hands of different societies, the symbol has been interpreted in a variety of ways. There is the decipherment of the rose that received much attention in Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code.
The rose is a symbol of secrecy, and the term...
I don't remember if we've discussed Da Vinci Code yet or not. It's a very wicked book. There's a documentary you can watch, debunking the Da Vinci Code, or Da Vinci Code Debunked, or something like that. Basically, this old Gnostic hidden mystery religion, Luciferian. We can use the word Gnostic, mystery religions, wisdom traditions interchangeably. They all are the serpent from the garden traditions. It's a Luciferian tradition. It's a denial of the God of the Bible. It's a denial of the Scriptures as the holy Word of God, and it's a do what thou wilt, ye shall become as God's philosophy. And that's in all of the occult religions, whether it's Rosicrucians, high-level Freemasonry, Mormonism, Roman Catholicism, whatever it is, it's the same. At the top of those mystery religions, at the top of those, you discover the Luciferian system. But the Da Vinci Code, and it started way back. Paul even warned us about Gnosticism, so it had started immediately after the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Immediately these false teachers came about, and the Gnostic tradition taught a blasphemous theory that Jesus had actually had sexual relations with Mary. I think Mary Magdalene is who they say, and that he had offspring. As of today, there's lineage of Jesus Christ, and it's an Illuminati bloodline. I wouldn't be shocked if the false prophet or the Antichrist in the last days comes from that so-called bloodline. But that's what the whole Da Vinci Code is based on, and it's really just this wicked mystery religion idea. And like I say, I suspect that's Da Vinci created the images that we see of Jesus, and I think I mentioned this before. We don't have any description in the Scriptures of what Jesus looked like. Da Vinci gave us a painting that he said it's what Jesus looked like, but I'm willing to bet that that's what that so-called bloodline, the Merovingian or whatever it's called bloodline, I think is what it is, the 13th bloodline of the Illuminati families. And we're going to get into all that down the road too, but so I wouldn't be surprised if some world leader comes along in the future here from that bloodline that looks like those portraits, that claims to be the Maitreya. He'll claim that all the religions of the world are correct, and in essence all have bits and pieces of the truth, and there needs to be unity, an ecumenical body to come together, and he'll be the head. He'll take the seat of the Pope. That'll be the how it develops into Roman Catholicism, the woman on top of the beast, or it'll be in the political sphere as a world leader or whatever. But I'll bet you he'll look something like that, because I'll bet you whatever bloodline they're pretending comes from Christ. That's the bloodline they use to create that image. That's the features of that family. But the Da Vinci Code is a messed up book. Like I say, I never read it. I watched the Debunking Da Vinci Code because I knew right out the gate what it was all about. So, I don't want to read that nonsense. But it's based on that Gnostic mystery. I highly recommend you go watch the Debunking the Da Vinci Code documentary. I'm not sure. I watched it years and years ago, so I'm not sure where you can find it. I'm sure it's probably on Google Videos or YouTube or something like that. But anyways, just thought I'd touch on that while they're talking about the Da Vinci Code here.
In Latin, that characterized the relationship of the rose to secrecy was sub rosa, meaning under the rose. So secret orders world round, when they swear to secrecy, swear sub rosa.
The secrecy of the rose represents the hidden knowledge of the ancient mystery religion, while the cross symbolizes Christianity. The combining of these two is what defines the belief of nearly all the secret orders.
The symbology there is the infusion of all this Eastern Persian spirituality into Christianity.
Was this fusion of beliefs a part of Bacon's plan? And what sort of impact could it have? The Reformers argued that the mixture of paganism and Christianity is what produced the Dark Ages. Would Bacon's program of the rose and cross be a blessing or a curse? And how would this whole thing be carried out?
When one follows the Rosicrucian trail, John Dee was a very, very key influence in the historical Rosicrucians, and some say even the founder of it, the first president of it. But at some point, the presidency was given over to Francis Bacon, and he was in charge of the Rosicrucians, not just in England, but it spread right through Europe, and was following Bacon's particular program. And outwardly Bacon called his program the advancement of proficience of learning.
This advancement of learning represented Bacon's desire to transform the world through knowledge. But he recognized that the key to obtaining knowledge was in a people's ability to communicate. As such, Bacon worked to reform the English language in ways never before realized.
And it is a bit strange that the English language, as crude as it was in the time of Bacon's youth, by the time he died, it was becoming one of the most refined languages. But in England at that time, the English was dreadful. It was garbled with all kinds of different dialects, because if you think about it, England was made up of the Saxons, the Danes, the Gauls who had invaded, they were the Frenchmen, and they had a whole mixture of languages. So very often one Englishman could not communicate with another.
To address the problem, Bacon surrounded himself with writers and poets who were like-minded.
All these people, these kind of intellectual people, they all read and wrote in Latin, but they said, look, we need an English language. We're going to be a great country. So they needed a language and literature. So how to develop that skill. And that's what, I think that's principally what Bacon did.
He gathered around him a literary society. Writers, poets, artists as well, and some of them were employed to as part of the Secret Service of Queen Elizabeth, and they had communications with people all over Europe, in all the different countries of Europe, and from their letters they derived the roots of new English words, which they invented and put out.
These new words were put out through a variety of literary works, books and poems and plays of the theater. Bacon's circle of writers and poets were largely responsible for the explosion of English literature during the Elizabethan era. They included such notable authors as Ben Jonson, Christopher Marlowe, Sir Walter Raleigh, and Edmund Spenser, to name a few. In addition, Bacon was dedicated to bringing the sacred knowledge of the ancient world to English-speaking people, knowledge otherwise kept hidden by the barriers of language.
when he died, and subsequent to that, they've culled together at least 2,000 books that not books that he wrote, because obviously one man couldn't write that number, but he had what he called a scriptorium. These were scribes who he paid to write for him. When he was the Lord High Chancellor of England, he had wealth, and he used to pay the scriptorium, these scribes, and he paid people to translate the classic books, Homer's Iliad, all the old Greek, the Roman classics, and all those classics, Livy, translate them all into English and put them in books. It turns out too that Bacon had a printing press. He had a factory with using brass plates for printing. That was his own thing. Nobody knew about that until rather recently. But nevertheless, there were 2,000 works that we know of that passed through his hands in one way or another to give literacy to the English public. Printing presses to make these books available to many people at a cheap price.
But Bacon's purpose and that of his literary society was to prepare the people of the old world to colonize the land of the new. As the term colonization scheme suggests, the launching of Bacon's plan for America was not by chance, but by design. It could be said that his great scheme began at an early age, perhaps when he was sent by Queen Elizabeth I to the court of France, where he was inspired by the example of the French poets.
Another major influence, he obviously was inspired in France by the French Pleiades, the group of French poets who were deliberately trying to make the French language into a really good language, particularly for poetry and writings and so on of that sort. And Bacon spent several years at the French court, came back very inspired and wanted to do the same thing for the English language.
Upon his return to England, he was sent to study law at the prestigious Gray's Inn in London, where his statue can be seen today. It was here that Bacon formed the beginnings of his own literary society, a secret group known as the Knights of the Helmet.
The Knights of the Helmet it's actually the name of a masque he wrote, or it's thought he must have written, because masques were put together by a lot of people for the royal court or for the Inns of Court, which was where the lawyers were. And to get a job as a lawyer or a minister or official in the government, you had to be first of all a lawyer, and you had to know how the royal court worked. So every year they had to put on huge celebrations imitating the royal court, and part of that celebration was masks. And many people were involved in creating these entertainments with their masks. Francis Bacon was just one of them, but he became a key one, and he wrote quite a lot of the mask material, which one can identify. You know, once you get to know Bacon and his writings, you can identify what was done. And he's acclaimed by the lawyers as being the great one who inspired them and led them and wrote for them, you know. But the Knights of the Helmets was the name of one of the masks at a key moment when the whole Shakespeare authorship, the name Shakespeare was being used for the first time.
The Knights of the Helmet took as their inspiration the Greek goddess Pallas Athena, who carried a spear and who wore a great helmet, a symbol of secrecy.
According to tradition, one that wears the helmet of Athena becomes invisible. And they had to swear allegiance to it. Not only that, Athena, the goddess Athena, carried a spear that she shook in the eyes of ignorance. And she was one of the greatest goddesses among the Greeks, ruling through intellect and man's wisdom.
Even as Dr. John Dee had been inspired by angelic beings, some researchers believe that a spiritual encounter with Pallas Athena gave Bacon the inspiration for his life's work.
Well, in some of those cipher writings that he had written, he writes there how this he heard a heavenly voice.
The voice he heard inspired him towards secrecy and to imitate the work of God.
The Divine Majesty takes delight to hide his work, according to the innocent play of children. Surely for thee to follow the example of the Most High God cannot be censored. Therefore put away popular applause, and after the manner of Solomon the king, compose a history of thy time, and fold it into enigmatical writings and cunning mixtures of the theatre.
That was his mission in life. And for the rest of Bacon's life, it was dedicated to that one purpose.
Baconian scholars believe that Bacon's revelation led him to develop a series of theatrical works that would teach the English people and transform them into a nation that could one day dominate the world and resurrect the Atlantean dream. Believing that he put away popular applause as his heavenly voice had commanded, he is said to have written behind the identity of William Shakespeare.
Shakespeare is a synonym for Apollo and Pallas Athena. They're both known as shakers of the spear in classical tradition, and the spear represents a ray of light, a ray of wisdom, and they shake that spear at the dragon of ignorance. Exactly what Ben Jonson says in his preface to the Shakespeare Folio, to shake a lance at the dragon of ignorance. And this is the role of an Apollo or Pallas Athena. And they have always been the muses of the other 9 muses, who themselves are the muses of all the writers, poets, artists, and so on in history. So Apollo and Athena are the great inspirers. They're the great Shakespeares.
Bacon incorporated these Greek gods within a key symbol, the AA headpiece representing Apollo and Athena. Usually one of the A's is shaded, denoting a light and dark side. This symbol is found printed at the head of certain pages within the Shakespeare Folio and among the acknowledged works of Francis Bacon. Of the two polarities, Apollo and Athena, it was Athena that seemed to dominate Bacon's imagination.
Pallas Athena was, she shook her spear at the eyes of ignorance, so she was the spear shaker. Now, she's always been known as the spear shaker. That was long before the time of Bacon. Back to the Greeks, the spear shaker. So he took that name, spear shaker, just turned it around to make it Shakespeare, and it used to be written with a hyphen, and then it became one word. Shakespeare as the name of the playwright for those Shakespearean plays.
But what of the real William Shakespeare, the Stratford man whose name has been revered for nearly 500 years? His writings have been attributed to a number of other authors, including the playwright Christopher Marlowe, Edward de Vere, the 17th Earl of Oxford, and even Queen Elizabeth herself. But Sir Francis Bacon seems to lead the pack of would-be bards, with well over 200 books, essays, and pamphlets on the subject, many of which insist he is the real and true Shakespeare. Meanwhile, Baconian scholars argue that the Stratford man simply lacked the experience and education to have written the works that bear his name.
There is a mystery, because when you look at the plays, everything that's in them and what lies behind them in terms of experience, knowledge, and so on like that's expressed through the plays, and the philosophy in the plays, and so on like that, they do not match up with what we know of the life of the actor. In fact, the life of the actor is quite well known. There's quite a lot of research been done on William Shakespeare Stratford, so a lot is known about his life, and none of it matches up what you can deduce from the author from the plays themselves. In fact, the more we find out about the life of the actor, the worse it gets.
Here you have a guy who is barely literate enough to make a mark, much less write his name. His mark was only existent in 5 documents. There's not a single letter either from him or to him by any of his contemporaries. How can this guy have written the greatest literary works in the history of the world? It just didn't happen.
Whoever's the author certainly knew about certain things happening abroad in the royal courts, in France, in Italy, and in Spain.
Not only taught the workings of the court, but the intrigues as well, and who would know that? Certainly not a play actor like the William Shakespeare. There's no way that man could have known the intrigues that went on inside the court. But Francis Bacon did. He was well familiar with it. He was brought up in the court.
You can't just say, oh, genius did it all. It's impossible for genius alone to do that. You've got to have all that background, experience, knowledge, and so on, to get something like the Shakespeare plays.
There's even a quote from one of the justices, one of the English justices, that it's clear that from the Shakespeare writings that the author had to be an attorney because there is not a single legal error contained in any of them.
He writes, the author writes naturally as if he's a lawyer. You know, it doesn't just put in legal terms here and there just to suit the story. It just, legal terms and the whole legal jargon just rolls off him absolutely naturally as if he's used to living in that environment all the time. Well, that doesn't fit the actor from Stratford.
There's just no way the historic William Shakespeare could have written these plays.
There's only one person who could possibly be the author of those plays, which is Francis Bacon.
Yet wouldn't the colossal size of all the plays, poems, and sonnets be too much for Bacon himself to complete, especially while becoming a lawyer, launching modern science, and writing the many other works attributed to him? This could be where the Knights of the Helmet took part, as evidence suggests that the plays may have been the collective effort of Bacon's literary society.
We know from historical records that Bacon actually had a literary group around him. Some of them were actually paid, employed by him, and others just did it voluntarily. A big group. Why? You know, why did he do that? You know, you don't employ a lot of people, or writers, poets, artists, and as well as cipher experts and so on. You don't employ them for nothing. So what do they do? And then you get the answer, the Shakespeare plays, because scholars have found that there's been other contributions in the plays from other poets and so on, who all put a little bit in here and there. And then you find that they were either associated with or employed by Bacon. In that group, they're all part of this one group. So then the picture emerges of a typical Renaissance studio, but instead of being an artist, a painter with his studio of pupils, you've got a writer with his studio of pupils working with him. They each contribute a little bit to the picture or the story, but the main artist or author is Francis Bacon himself.
But in the town of Stratford-upon-Avon, people come from all over the world to view the birthplace of the man considered to be the greatest literary mind of all time. In Stratford, they hold a strong view against the suggestion that Shakespeare was anyone but himself.
It's a conspiracy theory, and it's all aimed at toppling the greatest writer who's ever lived.
There is a Shakespearean trust in England, and these are people who are dedicated to the cause of supporting and maintaining that William Shakespeare, the actor, was the actual playwright. I think it's highly unlikely.
Dr. Paul Edmondson is the head of education at the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust in Stratford-upon-Avon. In this debate, he is known as a Stratfordian, not just because of where he lives, but because of his traditional view of Shakespeare. The Stratfordians are considered the academic adversaries of Baconians. We asked Dr. Edmondson to comment on the Bacon-Shakespeare theory.
It first occurred in 1785. A vicar just outside Stratford got to the age of 80, and then there's some report of him burning the papers that he'd been working on, as if in his later years he just kind of renounced any theory that he had about Bacon. It was taken up in 1856 by, what a surprise, Delia Bacon, no descendant, but she wanted to prove that Bacon wrote the plays. She even went as far as having herself locked in Holy Trinity Church to dig up the grave of Shakespeare, convinced that some manuscripts would have been inside the grave saying, "I did not write." the plays, it was Bacon instead. And she didn't get as far as digging up the corpse of Shakespeare, and later she went mad after the publication of her book. But her book was groundbreaking. She had good support from Nathaniel Hawthorne, Mark Twain. She knew literary figures in the States.
Mark Twain was certainly convinced that the historic William Shakespeare did not write the Shakespeare plays. And this is a guy, how can you deny his conclusions? He had the money to investigate it, he had the time to investigate it. He's not known as a crackpot in any other venue.
In 1909, Twain took up the Bacon-Shakespeare controversy with his own book titled Is Shakespeare Dead?, in which he questions the reputation of the Stratford actor in his lifetime.
He's saying that in Shakespeare's own life, no one regarded him as being important or famous or a brilliant playwright or anything like that. It was only 2 or 3 generations after his death that suddenly the historic William Shakespeare became a big deal. So however, the plays enjoyed immediate success and immediate prominence. So how do you explain that?
That's simply not true. There's all sorts of evidence that he died and that he was remembered after his death. First of all, there's the very significant memorial bust in Holy Trinity Church, which not only is an early likeness of Shakespeare to give us a sense of what the man actually looked like, but it also mentions him as a great writer on the inscription of the monument, "See living art, but page to serve his wit." I'm paraphrasing there, but it mentions living art and looking at the page rather than the monument, which is an echo of, or prefigures, possibly, the commendatory verse of Ben Jonson, Shakespeare's friend and contemporary playwright, at the front of the First Folio. The First Folio is the first time Shakespeare's works are gathered together after his death by his friends. That's crucial.
What is equally crucial is that the 2 tributes mentioned by Dr. Edmondson did not come about until years after Shakespeare's death. Other great writers of the time, like poet Ben Jonson, were given more immediate recognition within months of their passing. Just as importantly, the great folio assembled by Shakespeare's friends 7 years after his death contains what many believe to be some important clues. 19th century author W.F.C. Wigston referred to William Shakespeare as Phantom Captain Shakespeare, the Rosicrucian Mask. This may have been partly due to the world-famous Droeshout portrait that appears on the front of the original Great Folio of 1623. Note the presence of a line extending from the jawline of Shakespeare to the bottom of his left ear, as if to suggest the face were simply a mask. If this seems far-fetched, consider the dedication which appears beside it, written by poet Ben Jonson, a friend of both Shakespeare and Sir Francis Bacon. With a rather mysterious twist, Jonson concludes with the words, "Reader, look not on his picture, but his book." Why would Ben Jonson point the reader away from the face of Shakespeare and compel men to look upon the book instead? A dedication that seems to parallel the monument at Holy Trinity Church.
On the inscription of the monument, "See living art, but page to serve his wit." I'm paraphrasing there, but it mentions living art and looking at the page rather than the monument.
Are these allusions made by the men who knew the real William Shakespeare, that he was simply a mask or frontman for Francis Bacon?
Bacon paid him off to go and keep his mouth shut.
The monument at Holy Trinity Church refers to the page that serves Shakespeare's wit. But when one looks upon the page beneath his hand, it turns out to be blank. Some Baconians believe this is a secret code, alerting the reader that the Stratford man himself wrote nothing. The empty page is said to match the empty expression on the face of Shakespeare, who Baconians argue could barely write his name.
It's actually a big embarrassment to, you could say, the academic fraternity that believed the actor wrote the plays.
The question of Shakespeare's literacy is often mentioned because of the few known signatures he left behind. As one writer puts it, The scrawling, uncertain method of their execution stamps Shakespeare as unfamiliar with the use of a pen.
Perhaps a modern equivalent of this is to say, how good is your signature on your credit card? How good is your signature when you sign your name in a shop or on a bank transaction or whatever? There are several signatures which survive of Shakespeare. How good would you like them to be?
While Baconians argue that Shakespeare lacked experience, Edmondson points out that, as the son of a glove maker, he was uniquely qualified.
There's lots of references to different kinds of leather. For example, Feste's line in Act 3, Scene 1 of Twelfth Night about someone's wit being like a cheverel glove. Cheverel, as the son of a glove maker, Shakespeare would have known, is a kind of kid skin which stretches and stretches and stretches when you're making the gloves. It's a very soft, supple material to work with. And here you have it immersed in the wordplay of one of Shakespeare's clowns. Francis Bacon knew nothing about different kinds of leather, I would suggest. Actually, you could turn this whole thing on its head and say that Shakespeare wrote Bacon, which is something that a lot of people don't suggest, because why bother to do it that way around?
One of the problems is the Shakespearean trust is that while these objections come up to William Shakespeare being the author of the plays, they refuse to investigate the contrary evidence which has been put forward to them. They refuse to look into it. They refuse to look into the cipher codes that Bacon incorporated in the first folios, for instance.
Bacon uses this cipher in the Shakespeare work and his own, and in the work under his own name. But he also, in doing that, signs his name and the name of the Rosicrucian fraternity.
This code system of writing he used all in his entire life.
The examination of the cipher codes in Shakespeare's plays have filled hundreds of books and essays over the last few centuries. But perhaps the most specific evidence are the presence of Baconian and Rosicrucian emblems in the Great Folio of 1623 and in earlier works by Shakespeare. Bacon's light A and dark A symbol appears, representing the two Shakespeares, Apollo and Athena. Meanwhile, this Rosicrucian emblem, featuring the god Pan, is found prominently throughout the work. Other mystical headpieces with Rosicrucian symbolism are found both in the Shakespeare Folio of 1623 and in works openly published by Sir Francis Bacon. The varied symbols and ciphers clearly mark the presence of Bacon and his Rosicrucian fraternity, while to what extent they were involved in the writing of the plays remains a matter of debate. But perhaps the most compelling evidence is that the works of Shakespeare helped to accomplish exactly what Bacon and his Knights of the Helmet set out to achieve. While the numbers vary, the plays are said to have developed some 20,000 words for the English language, with some words being created, older words being revived, and current words being used in new ways. Could the actor from Stratford, with a limited education, have accomplished this coincidentally? The Shakespeare controversy was illustrated quite clearly by Masonic author Manly P. Hall in his book, The Secret Teachings of All Ages, where he reveals the veiled purpose behind the writing of the plays. He says, Sir Francis Bacon, the Rosicrucian initiate, wrote into the Shakespearean plays the secret teachings of the fraternity of the Rose and Cross and the true rituals of the Masonic order. The Bacon-Shakespeare controversy involves the most profound aspects of science, religion, and ethics. He who solves its mystery may yet find therein the key to the supposedly lost wisdom of antiquity. The lost wisdom that Hall refers to is said to have begun in ancient Atlantis.
I could never read through his stuff. It was all confusing to me.
Is this the real key to understanding Shakespeare? Incredibly, it may be said that the plays themselves represent the whole confusion of America's foundation. For while Shakespeare contains a clear representation of Christianity, with some 1,200 biblical references, along with them are plays with openly pagan and magical themes. Like the symbol of the rose and cross, the plays combine the teachings of Christianity with the wisdom of the mystery religion. The purpose in blending religions in this way might have been to avoid the wars and conflicts that have afflicted men over the centuries. Bacon, who saw religious persecution in his own day, may have inherited this view from an earlier Masonic influence, the Knights Templar.
The whole episode of the fall of the Knights Templar is a matter of conflicting historical controversy.
We do know that when they left the Holy Land, the order had increased in numbers and power, and by the beginning of the 1200s, they had returned to Europe, and the Knights Templar then became the dominant financial force in Europe.
The Templars were the people that loaned the money. Well, of course, the popes and people to whom the money was, they owned the money, they could get rid of their debt by getting rid of the Templars, and they did.
But in addition to the issue of debt, the Templars were accused for embracing certain religious doctrines they had picked up during their time in the Holy Land. It is said they began to combine the teachings of Christianity with the influence of Islam and Judaism, as well as spin-off cults known as the Yazidi and the Hashashin.
What people did not understand is they had adopted the teachings of the ancient esoteric religions.
And they were decreed by the Pope in 1308 in Europe and 1309 in England that the Templars should be disbanded, if not hunted down and killed.
Many Templars were tortured under the Inquisition and even burned at the stake for heresy. But some of them escaped.
And a lot of them, I think, went underground, because by no means did the Dragnet, if you will, capture all of them. A lot of them fled to Scotland.
They had to go into hiding. And one of the places they found to hide was the Masonic Lodge.
There's no question but that the Knights Templar are the real fulcrum of the latter development of Freemasonry. And that's not saying that Freemasonry did not pre-exist the Knights Templar. It did. As the builders, as guilds of builders throughout Europe.
It is from the influence of the Knights Templar that many believe Masonry began to develop its modern philosophy. A philosophy literally carved in stone and found in one of the most intriguing monuments of the Western world. Just outside of Edinburgh, Scotland, is the Rosslyn Chapel, a place that may well provide a door to understanding Masonry, the Knights Templar, and the ancient plan for America.
It very conclusively demonstrates a profound relationship between Scotland and the Templars and the Freemasons, which is not really any big revelation. But of course, the whole idea is that the three things go together.
The chapel was built in the 15th century by William St. Clair. The tomb of his ancestor of the same name, and who died a century earlier, is found within. His name, as it appears, William St. Clair, Knight Templar, is believed to be a link between the Templars and the Scottish Masons who built this mysterious chapel.
The chapel the foundation stone was laid in 1446, and it was finished about 1492. So it took 50 odd years to build. And the interesting fact is that William St. Clair, the builder, was 50 when the job started, and he died when it stopped. So this man was uniquely old, because in medieval times you wouldn't expect to live perhaps more than 35 years or so. But William St. Clair was into his 90s, so he was a remarkable character all the way around. Everything about him was remarkable, including the legacy he's left us.
The legacy of Rosslyn Chapel seems to be the very essence of the Templar belief and that of secret societies everywhere. The removal of all boundaries concerning world religion. As noted before, this Gnostic theme is well captured in Dan Brown's best-selling book, The Da Vinci Code, a work that has created worldwide controversy. During our visit to Rosslyn Chapel, we encountered Erwin Lutzer, author of the book, The Da Vinci Deception.
Maybe that's the name of the
Of course, as we know, Rosslyn Chapel has become famous because of the Da Vinci Code. And you have people coming from all over the world staring at its ceilings, trying to crack its codes. As we walk through it, it's very probable that the Masons who built it had a field day. They decided that they were going to combine all kinds of mythological elements along with the Bible. So you have Masonic elements in the chapel, you have some pagan elements, you have Christian elements, and they're all thrown together.
Rosslyn Chapel is probably one of the most extraordinary buildings in the world. It is like a Disneyland of Masonry and Rosicrucianism.
I think the chapel is an enigma. It satisfies the needs of a great number of people who come to Rosslyn for a whole raft of reasons. If you're a Knight Templar or a Freemason, if you are an American looking for some links with the New World before it was discovered, if you're a Sinclair, if you're religious or an art historian or an architectural historian, an esoteric, Rosslyn has got something for you. If you're a paganist, we have over 110 green men. Most churches will have 1 or 2 green men, but we have over 100 of them.
The green man is a representation of an ancient fertility god, just one of the many pagan icons in the chapel.
And so Rosslyn, not only does it offer a great many things to different people, but it also offers a mystery.
The mystery, he explains, is that Rosslyn Chapel, while designed as a Christian church, is filled with so many religious symbols, a person is confused about what they are compelled to worship.
It's like having a VCR. You know pretty much what it's meant to do, but you can't actually make it work properly. No one can follow the instructions. And the chapel is like that. We know it's a church. That's fair enough. But it has so many other little stories connected with it and mysteries, and the carvings are not particularly clear, and they can be interpreted one way or another. And so for everything you see in the chapel, there's probably 3 answers, and that, I think, is its great appeal.
Centuries after its construction, researchers continue to...
And that's the ecumenical plan. It's in 2000, when the Pope hosted ecumenical worldwide religion services, he invited Indian shaman and Buddhists and Hinduists and the Dalai Lama and all that nonsense. Their point was all roads lead to God. You know, worship in any way you want. Here's a temple of worship with various numerous gods. Come and worship. Everybody's together. You can worship whatever God you want. They're even okay worshiping Jesus. The problem is if you take the biblical stance and saying that there's only one God, only one way to God, and that's through the man Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior, who saves us through his death, burial, and resurrection. He's an exclusive God. He is the only one. And so at that meeting in 2000, they announced that, in a sense, in probably not so dramatic words, but there is one enemy, and that's fundamental biblical Christians. They said they are the one enemy because we won't bow down. You know, we don't force our religion upon anybody. We don't tell you must worship or you'll die in a physical sense. We warn you that you must worship the one true God, or when you die, you're going to be held accountable by him. But we don't force that upon people. We just tell people. And we're unwilling to bend because that is the truth. You know, we are people who have had our eyes opened to the sense that 2 + 2 = 4. And we're not okay if somebody says, well, it equals 5 for me and it equals 7 for me. We go, no, there's a truth. It equals 4. I'm not going to beat you up because you believe in 5 or 7. You can believe that if you want, but it ain't the truth. The truth is, the answer is 4. And so we stand and say the truth is Jesus Christ and him alone. And we're not going to just pat you on the back and say, it's okay if you worship the green man, or it's okay if you worship Allah, or it's okay if you worship Buddha. We're going to say, no, those paths lead to hell. You're going to die and give an account. You are required by the God of the universe to worship him alone, to come to him in the manner he prescribes. And so we are the enemy. That is why we are viewed as the enemy, because this new world system is this. It's all religions. Come and worship any way you want. Just don't say your way's the only way. And we're unwilling to bend. We're not going to bow to that. We're not going to say, yeah, go ahead, because we don't want people to go to hell. It's not okay for people to pretend, and they're going to die and wake up in hell. They're going to appear before the judgment seat and have to go to hell. And that's not okay. We want to warn them. We want to plead with them because we care about souls. We're willing to give our lives because we know that the world is going to hate our message of exclusivity and they will kill us. But we are willing to sacrifice our lives in order to tell the truth because your eternal soul depends upon it. And so we, biblical Christians, don't fit into the New World Order. We ain't a part of it. The lukewarm Christians are. You can worship Jesus, just, be okay with them worshiping Buddha. Be okay with them worshiping Brahma. Be okay with them worshiping Jabulan. Whatever they want, just you can worship Jesus. And there's a lot of lukewarm Christians in name only that aren't really born again that will be okay with that will go along with that New World Order system. And we'll say, Jesus works for me, but whatever works for you. And because we're going, no, you're going to die. You're going to go to hell, unless you repent of that nonsense and turn to the truth. Because of that is our message. We aren't going to be included. We're going to, the scriptures tell us we'll be persecuted and killed and hunted, and people who kill us will think they're doing God's business. They're doing a service for God. So we are the enemy of the world. We're going to be the criminals of the world in this New World Order system. But this building gives you an example of what that New World Order system is. Under the Catholic Church, the Pope will sit at the head of it. The Antichrist system will sit at the head and say, worship any way you want, But we get the power, we get the control, but worship anything you want. That's why it was the Pope that hosted that worldwide ecumenical movement.
Question: the overarching message of the chapel. What was the intent of its design?
It may have had a point for the Masons who made it, in the sense that there were various messages that were conveyed.
Essentially, Masonry's doctrine, foundationally, and they will even say this publicly, is universalism, which is the idea that basically all religions are the same. It doesn't matter what religion you are, as long as you're sincere and devout in your beliefs, and that all men, they say, may gather at the hospitable altars of Masonry no matter what their religious belief. So, in that sense, they're very much part of pushing toward a one-world religion, and to view biblical Christianity as basically the enemy. Because biblical Christianity makes unique claims about itself that none of these other groups, the Rosicrucians, the Masons, any of these groups, will acknowledge.
Some of us are convinced it's important that Christianity be held distinct from some of the elements that are found here in Rosslyn Chapel. After all, the message of Jesus Christ is very, very unique. But throughout history, you've always found those who want to blend together various ideas, various organizations, and various religions. And here at the Rosslyn Chapel, people can come and they can practically see anything that they want.
But within the monument is evidence, not only of what the Templars and Masons came to believe, but perhaps a reflection of things to come. The promise of a land where one day their ancient hope might be fulfilled. For inside Rosslyn Chapel, along with the haunting imagery, is evidence of the New World prior to the discovery of Columbus.
Well, there is this window which is decorated. The window frame is decorated with Indian corn or maize, and the chapel was built in the 15th century. So it is strange that Indian corn, which wasn't ever grown here, is used as a motif.
The chapel was finished around 1492, the same year Columbus is thought to have come to America. This would mean the carvings would have been completed beforehand. But how did the masons who built this chapel have knowledge of Indian corn, a crop not grown in Europe and indigenous to the New World?
Who knows? There are lots of mysteries about this chapel.
Another mystery is the presence of aloe cactus plants, also indigenous to America, and like the Indian corn, carved along the arches of the chapel. But even with these, academics have been skeptical. Yet a third carving, a trefoil plant, or type of clover, is said by Rosslyn Chapel director Stuart Beattie to have convinced one skeptic in particular.
The trefoil plant is quite interesting. Rosslyn Chapel does have carvings of plants that we believe came from the New World before Columbus discovered America. We've had these plants investigated.
It's so weird that people keep talking about, even to this day, people still talk. We have a Columbus Day, and we know he didn't discover America. The Vikings were coming over here hundreds of years before him. I never understood, like, okay, it's admitted publicly, Columbus didn't really discover America. There was people here before, and the Vikings came over and probably other people. But we're still going to pretend that Columbus discovered America in 1492, and we're still going to celebrate Columbus today. How does that make any sense at all? Like as soon as they said, you know what, there were Vikings here 400 years before Columbus, let's get rid of this Columbus Day and stop teaching in history books that Columbus discovered America in 1492. It's so asinine to me. It doesn't make any sense. Why do they keep promoting something they know not to be true? It's bizarre.
A botanist from the university had a good look at them, and he wasn't particularly convinced, as academics need to be. He wasn't 100% sure that these plants were in fact aloe cactus and sweet corn. And I think his logic was that the people who went to the New World and recorded these images on parchment brought those images back. They would have been translated to wood and then subsequently translated to stone. And it's that process which removes them from the original 2 or 3 times, which means that there are discrepancies that can build in. And so, being an academic, he was uncomfortable with these images. And when looking around the chapel, he suddenly, his eyes lit up, and he came and got me, and he said, whilst I was fairly unsure about the sweet corn and aloe cactus as being honestly genuine, I have found a trefoil plant on what would have been the outside of the chapel at the time, but is now the baptistry, that would only have been found in the New World. Therefore, I am much more comfortable to say that the other plants are also honest and true.
When the Templars were arrested in Europe, many of them are said to have escaped with a great fleet of ships that were never to be found. Could they have made their way to the New World? If so, they could have handed down this knowledge through secret societies to men like Francis Bacon, and before him, Christopher Columbus.
Some people believe that Columbus didn't just accidentally stumble onto America, that some secret society which he had access to had knowledge of the existence of the continent of both North and South America.
Was Christopher Columbus a member of a secret order? Some researchers point to this painting that depicts Columbus with his left hand in a Kabbalistic gesture, denoting the left-hand path of the initiate, meaning the path of darkness or secrecy. In addition, the ships of Columbus sailed to the New World, adorned with red crosses on a white background, the symbol of the Knights Templar.
Columbus's wife was the daughter of a famous Knights Templar line that passed along what are called portolands and cartographs that Columbus had direct access to. And we know that he robbed the Portuguese and brought all of those portolands to Isabella and Ferdinand. What I'm suggesting is that people knew about this new Atlantis. They knew at the time of Columbus and before the time of Columbus.
But did the secret societies involved view the New World as Atlantis of old? And if so, from where did they develop this idea? Was it only from Plato's account? Or from a belief more deeply rooted in America's secret history? In his groundbreaking book, America BC, Harvard professor Barry Fell reveals the presence of ancient Europeans in New England and the American Midwest as far back as 800 BC. The author uncovers evidence of ancient Celts and Druids, with travelers from Spain, Libya, Carthage, Rome, and Egypt, all of whom came to the New World centuries prior to its so-called discovery by Columbus. His research exposes that the all-seeing eye was present in places like Vermont and New Hampshire long before the new order of the ages was declared. Does this stand as proof that America was indeed known by the ancients, and that its destiny has been the plan of secret societies from long ago? Sir Francis Bacon believed it was his mission to reform the world in preparation for building paradise on earth, to lead mankind into a new age.
And Bacon himself called himself the herald of the new age, which is the title of Elijah. And in tradition, Elijah is said to come again and again to prepare people for the coming of the Messiah, or coming of the Christ, which has many different interpretations.
As shown before, the Masonic Christ is perceived as the hypotenuse in the 47th proposition of Euclid. This rare Pythagorean symbol is found among the Masonic regalia of the 4th Earl of Rosslyn, whose family owns the Rosslyn Chapel. Oddly enough, this same emblem forms the heart of the design for Washington, D.C., known as the L'Enfant Triangle. Masonic author David Obeson claims that the entire city of Washington is based around this Pythagorean theorem. If so, America's capital might stand as the ultimate dedication to Bacon's great plan, a city designed symbolically to represent the Masonic Christ that Bacon came to herald. If these things are so, what can this mean for the secret destiny of America?
Okay, so that's the end of Disc 1 of America's Secret Beginnings, The New Atlantis. Is that Part 1? Part 2 is Riddles and Stone, which of the three I think is the best one. All three are great documentaries, but that one's really eye-opening and very informative. So it should be really good to get into that. I'm looking forward to it. So yeah, that's what, Lord willing, where we'll pick up next time. As always, I appreciate you guys watching. I love you, and we'll talk to you later.